Hello, welcome to the channel. Before we begin, I'd like to know, where are you watching us from today? Leave a comment, because we'd love to know all the corners of the world where this story reaches. If you enjoy mysteries, suspense, and stories that reveal dark secrets from the past, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any adventures. The wind cut across the vast plains of Iowa, scattering dry leaves and the scent of damp earth through the cold air. The old mansion, built of grey stone and with tall windows that seemed like watchful eyes, dominated the isolated landscape. No one passed by without feeling a pang of apprehension, as if the place were observing their every step. The protagonist, Jonathan Whitaker. Jonathan was an American historian fascinated by the stories of European families who migrated to the United States in the early 20th century. His reputation as a meticulous investigator preceded him. No one dared question his ability to uncover secrets hidden in dusty archives. Jonathan arrived at the property with the feeling that something deeper awaited him. He carried a leather notebook, an old camera, and a look that mixed curiosity and caution. The antagonist, Count Victor Hohenberg, he had settled on the property decades earlier, fleeing scandals and intrigues in Vienna. No one in the city knew exactly what he was hiding, and the air of mystery only fueled the rumors. To the locals, the mansion was more than a building. It was a living presence that seemed to whisper stories of the past and warn of the dangers of their curiosity. Jonathan walked through the silent corridors, feeling the creaking of the floorboards beneath his feet. Each antique painting, each dusty crystal chandelier, seemed to hold memories of events that should never be revealed. He found no signs of life, but the place was not deserted. There were subtle, almost imperceptible clues. A slightly displaced book, fingerprints in the dust of a window, the faint scent of an old perfume that seemed to emerge from nowhere. The central conflict slowly emerged. Jonathan's investigation clashed with Count Victor's need to keep his past buried. Each step Jonathan took inside the mansion revealed fragments of a secret that could completely change the perception of local history and perhaps even cost him his own safety. The suspense intensified with each closed door Jonathan opened, each corridor that seemed to lead to an unknown space where echoes of the past whispered macabre stories. Even without lengthy dialogues, the tension was palpable. The Count, always one step ahead, used subtle strategies to confuse the intruder. Corridors that seemed to lengthen, paintings that changed position, small displaced objects that Jonathan didn't remember touching. The narrative unfolded through action and reaction, with Jonathan becoming increasingly cautious, while the mansion became a character in itself, shaping and distorting the course of the investigation. The element of mystery was clear. What exactly was the Count hiding? Rumors spoke of forbidden documents, secret rituals, and even unexplained disappearances. But the reality remained an enigma. Jonathan, driven by a thirst for discovery, knew that every clue could be a trap, and yet he pressed on. The first night inside the mansion brought another level of tension. Moonlight filtered through the Gothic windows, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. An old clock ticked away hours that no one could quite hear. Distant footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, but looking around, there was no one there. Jonathan felt the first real contact with what was to come. The feeling that the mansion held not only the Count's secrets, but also dark memories of all those who had come too close to its mystery. There was a silent promise in the air. The story he was about to uncover would be unlike anything he had ever known. Every action Jonathan took, every decision made in the dark, was a step toward something that could defy reason and understanding. The tension was established, the characters introduced, and the central conflict clear. The battle between the investigator's curiosity and the buried secrets of the European nobleman was only beginning. Jonathan holds the first clue in his hands, an old diary with pages burned at the edges. He feels that every missing word could be crucial, but the fear of the unknown grows with each passing moment. The mansion watches, silent and relentless, as the suspense deepens and the investigation intensifies. Victor Hohenberg's estate stood like a reliquary of a bygone era. The once lush gardens were now covered in moss and gnarled trees that cast long shadows across the uneven ground. Marble statues, partially broken by time, watched each visitor with stony gazes. Every detail, from the wrought iron fences to the stained glass windows, bore the mark of an old Europe transplanted to the rural heart of the United States. For Jonathan, each object, each corridor, was a window into the Earl's past, and a reminder that nothing there was trivial. The secondary characters began to take shape in this setting. Clara Whitaker. Clara, Jonathan's distant cousin and a genealogy expert, provided valuable information about the Hohenberg family. Her presence was practical and firm, balancing her cousin's impulsiveness. She noticed details Jonathan might overlook: discreet symbols engraved on doors, repeated patterns in carpets and curtains, small notes hidden in forgotten drawers. Clara was the bridge between the present world and the historical labyrinth of the mansion, allowing the reader to see the contrast between meticulous investigation and ancestral mystery. Count Victor, for his part, was much more than a cold antagonist. His story was steeped in historical and cultural events. He was born in Vienna, grew up in a society obsessed with status and honor, and carried with him the traumas of family scandals. Every action he took in the American mansion reflected his attempt to preserve a legacy tainted by dark secrets. He didn't need to be constantly described. His attitudes, the care he took with objects, the way he adjusted candles or observed visitors from afar, were enough to reveal layers of his personality. While Jonathan explored the Count's library, Clara guided him through less obvious corridors, explaining subtleties of the setting. Certain paintings had been imported from Germany, each containing symbols that indicated ancient alliances or rivalries. Books in French and Italian contained lost letters from ancestors. Each historical and cultural detail served not only to embellish the narrative, but to reinforce the motivations, fears, and intentions of the characters. The world came alive, breathing along with Jonathan's curiosity and Victor's silent vigilance. The tension between the characters was marked by small gestures. The Count always appeared in unexpected places, observing without being noticed. Clara maintained a critical gaze, anticipating movements. Jonathan, often alone, sensed the presence of something deeper than mere curiosity. The setting amplified each emotion. The walls, with their old insulation, created echoes that transformed ordinary footsteps into menacing sounds. The stained glass windows cast distorted light, making shadows stretch out unsettlingly. Subplots began to emerge naturally. Clara, for example, had her own motivation: to discover if the Hohenberg family had been involved in illicit dealings in Europe and how this influenced her present. Jonathan, on the other hand, faced an ethical dilemma. To what extent should he advance in his investigation without putting his own safety at risk? The Count, aware of the visitor's curiosity, began to create subtle obstacles, manipulating objects and clues to confuse them, testing their ability to interpret ancient signs. The country's historical and cultural environment, the rural heartland of the United States with European heritage, became part of the conflict. Dirt roads, constant fog, and physical isolation increased Jonathan and Clara's vulnerability, while the mansion functioned as a microcosm of guarded secrets. Each of the protagonist's decisions was influenced by this combination of culture, history, and emotional tension, making the narrative rich in layers but without losing pace. Finally, the interaction between characters revealed nuances of personality and alliances. Jonathan partially trusted Clara, but his drive for answers put him in risky situations. Clara balanced caution and determination, ensuring that the secrets discovered were understood in context. Victor, silent and calculating, manipulated everyone's perception, always staying one step ahead. The main conflict solidified in this scenario, the tension between curiosity and the protection of the secret, between action and reaction, between past and present. Jonathan leans over an old French diary, his hands trembling slightly. Clara observes, her eyes attentive to the smallest details of the surroundings. In the distance, in the upper corridor, Victor's silhouette disappears through a half-open door, leaving a feeling that every movement is being monitored. The world of the mansion is deeper than any map could show. Every corridor, every object, every shadow plays a role in the unfolding story. The silence of the mansion grew almost suffocating as Jonathan made his way through the narrow corridors, lit only by the faint glow of old candles. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, as if the building itself reacted to his presence. It was no longer just academic curiosity. There was something in the air that suggested the Hohenberg family secret could have far more serious consequences than any story he had ever investigated. The first obstacle appeared almost imperceptibly. Upon entering the west wing of the mansion, Jonathan noticed that some doors, which he remembered having opened before, were now locked with no key in sight. A faint trail of ashes on the floor indicated that someone had recently used fire, perhaps to destroy evidence. The tension was rising. The mansion was not merely an abandoned place, it was active territory shaped by the Count's intentions. While exploring the library again, Jonathan found a secret compartment behind a bookshelf. Inside, old documents revealed shady financial transactions, records of missing persons, and coded letters that spoke of secret rituals and pacts. With each discovery, the line between history and real danger blurred. Jonathan realized that the family's secret wasn't just a social scandal. There were hidden forces and intentions that could put any intruder at risk. Clara, ever watchful, suggested caution, but Jonathan couldn't contain himself. The need to understand the truth was greater than the immediate fear. This dynamic introduced a constant tension, the balance between the obsession with answers and the prudence necessary to survive in a hostile environment. Small signs of Victor appeared more frequently. Distant footsteps, creaking doors, slightly displaced objects. Each clue seemed orchestrated to test the visitor's perception. The antagonist, Count Victor, began to interact more directly with the conflict. He didn't appear directly, but his actions were strategic and psychological. False letters, coded messages left in unexpected places, and manipulation of the environment, such as locked windows or lights turned off at the right moment, created a feeling of constant persecution and surveillance. Jonathan and Clara realized they were in the middle of a much bigger game than they had imagined, and that each move could trigger unpredictable consequences. The subplots also intensified. Clara discovered that some missing objects from the mansion had been discreetly sent to auctions in Europe, possibly to cover up traces of the Count's past. Jonathan, in turn, began to suspect that there were more people interested in the mansion's secrets, perhaps descendants of the Hohenberg family or agents of still unknown interests. Each new layer added complexity to the conflict, increasing the sense of urgency and danger. To complicate matters further, the mansion seemed almost alive. The corridors changed appearance, depending on the light or the angle of view, making it impossible to memorize a route with certainty. The old clock that marked each hour seemed to run slow or fast without explanation, contributing to the feeling of disorientation. Jonathan and Clara realized that the mansion was not just a setting, it was an active part of the conflict, reacting to their actions and shaping the narrative in an almost conscious way. The main conflict reached a critical point when Jonathan found a diary that mentioned events that occurred in Vienna, detailing pacts and acts of betrayal by the Hohenberg family before their immigration. It was evident that the story Victor was trying to hide had repercussions that were not only personal, but potentially historical and criminal. Jonathan's moral dilemma intensified. Could revealing what he found destroy the reputation of an entire family, or expose dangerous secrets that perhaps should remain buried? Small clashes arose between Jonathan and Clara, reflecting different perspectives on the investigation. Jonathan wanted to move forward, take risks, discover, while Clara insisted on caution, planning, and analysis. This tension not only enriched the characters, but also reinforced the central conflict, the search for truth versus the need for protection and prudence. Each decision made by the protagonists directly impacted the narrative, creating an intense rhythm of action, suspense, and revelations. Finally, Victor's indirect presence became more menacing. A dinner mysteriously left on the table, with polished silverware and a lit candle, indicated that he knew exactly where Jonathan and Clara were. The atmosphere of constant threat transformed the academic investigation into a psychological game of life or death, heightening the suspense and setting the stage for even more intense future events. Jonathan holds an old letter, written in Old French, and feels his hand tremble. He looks at Clara, who holds an old map with coded symbols. Upstairs, footsteps echo and a door closes by itself. The conflict is no longer just about ancient secrets. It's a silent battle between human curiosity and the dangers the past can impose. As Jonathan and Clara made their way through the mansion, small subplots began to intertwine with the main conflict, making the narrative richer and more intricate. Each corridor seemed to hide parallel stories that, at first glance, did not connect directly to the investigation, but gradually proved essential to understanding the true extent of Victor Hohenberg's secret. One of these subplots involved the caretaker of the mansion, an elderly man named Samuel, who lived discreetly in the back of the property, knew every corner of the mansion, every secret corridor, and observed visitors from a distance. Samuel never spoke directly about the Count or the mysteries of the past, but his subtle actions, locking doors, moving objects, or leaving discreet clues, indicated a deep knowledge and perhaps an ambiguous loyalty. Jonathan and Clara realized that Samuel could be both a source of help and a silent trap, adding layers to the conflict without ever explicitly appearing. Another subplot emerged from Victor's European past. Letters and diaries revealed family feuds involving other nobles who migrated to the United States. Some members of these families mysteriously disappeared or met obscure fates, suggesting that Victor may have inherited or continued dangerous practices to protect his name. This historical connection made the plot more complex, showing that the mansion was not just an isolated location, but an intersection between events in the Old World and the American present. Meanwhile, the relationship between Jonathan and Clara gained emotional nuances. The trust between them was constantly tested, and small disagreements revealed deep characteristics. Jonathan tended towards impulsiveness and an obsession with knowledge, while Clara sought balance and critical analysis. This tension created relationship subplots, where each decision to advance or retreat in the investigation reflected not only strategy, but also emotional dynamics. The interactions between them served to humanize the narrative, showing that the danger of the mansion lay not only in the Count's secrets, but also in human choices in the face of fear and uncertainty. Time pressure was another crucial element. Certain clues could only be found at specific moments, such as the dawn light falling on certain stained glass windows, or the exact time a secret door opened by itself. This restriction created urgency, forcing Jonathan and Clara to act quickly and increasing the narrative tension. Every mistake could cost precious time, distancing them from the truth or exposing them to direct risks. The mansion once again proved to be active and almost conscious, reacting to the protagonists' movements and demanding their constant attention. Small discoveries added complexity to the plot. An old safe concealed records of illegal transactions and secret pacts. A painting contained codes that could only be deciphered with historical knowledge. An old mirror reflected images that seemed distorted or showed people who weren't there. Each detail was an additional layer of tension, forcing Jonathan and Clara to connect seemingly unrelated fragments. This complexity increased the reader's involvement, challenging them to interpret signs and anticipate the movements of the characters and the mansion. Furthermore, the indirect antagonists themselves emerged as subplots. Mysterious characters were mentioned in the letters and old documents, descendants of European families interested in protecting or exploiting Victor's secrets. These figures created external threats that could materialize at any moment, reminding us that the danger was not confined to the mansion. Jonathan's every move was monitored not only by the Count, but also by those who had ulterior motives and enough power to interfere in the investigation. Finally, the narrative worked on the interconnection between subplots and the main conflict. Each seemingly isolated detail, each secondary character, each historical or cultural event proved essential to understanding the final secret. The mansion and its mysteries functioned as a large chessboard where actions and consequences intersected, increasing tension and preparing the ground for the turning point. Jonathan examines an old box of coded letters, while Clara discovers a secret compartment behind the fireplace. Samuel watches from a distance, silent, almost like a shadow. The pressure mounts. Every wrong move could distance them from the truth or put them in danger. The Count's European past and the secrets that cross the Atlantic become more tangible, and the mansion, with its oppressive atmosphere, proves to be alive and unpredictable, ready to test every decision of the protagonists. The air in the mansion felt heavier that night. The wind howled through the Gothic windows, and the shadows cast by the candles danced on the stone walls, as if the building itself were alive and watching Jonathan and Clara's every move. They had followed clues for days, connecting fragments of letters, diaries, and hidden symbols, but nothing had prepared them for what they were about to discover. While Jonathan was examining a secret compartment behind the bookcase, he found a larger diary, bound in dark leather, with pages that exuded an old, musty smell. Upon opening it, he noticed that the letters were smaller and denser than anything he had ever seen. The first lines described events in Vienna, secret rituals of the Hohenberg family, obscure pacts, and, surprisingly, mentions of a passage to a hidden location within the mansion itself in the United States. Meanwhile, Clara was exploring the West Wing when she heard a metallic clang coming from the upper floor. She quickly went upstairs, only to find a door they had never noticed before. Upon opening it, they discovered a hidden corridor, narrow and damp, that seemed to stretch endlessly. The walls were covered in ancient symbols and inscriptions, as if every inch of that space carried secret meanings. The tension intensified. They were about to enter a part of the mansion that not even the Count seemed willing to reveal. The turning point materialized in an even more impactful way when, while crossing the corridor, Clara tripped on a loose slab, revealing an underground compartment. Inside, an ancient safe, sealed with unknown symbols, held something that would completely change Jonathan's perception of the entire investigation. Upon opening the safe, they found documents and objects that revealed not only the family's secret pacts, but also evidence of mysterious disappearances and dark rituals that had spanned decades, crossing continents. The central revelation came from a detail no one expected: Among the papers, a letter addressed to Jonathan written by Victor Hohenberg. In it, the Count admitted that the secrets of the mansion had been carefully preserved, not only to protect his own family, but also to prevent certain historical events linked to ancient rituals and secret alliances from becoming public. Victor explained that his move to the United States was not only to escape European scandals, but also to create a safe place where the secrets could be kept and monitored. The discovery completely changed the narrative dynamic. Jonathan realized that the true conflict wasn't just about discovering what was hidden, but understanding the historical and moral weight of revealing or concealing those secrets. Clara, in turn, found herself torn between the excitement of the discovery and the fear of the consequences that could result from its exposure. The emotional tension reached its peak. Decisions needed to be made quickly, and each step could irrevocably alter the characters' destinies. The turning point wasn't limited to the physical discovery. The mansion itself reacted to the events. Doors that had previously remained closed opened on their own. Drafts of cold wind swept through isolated corridors. Shadows seemed to move with a consciousness of their own, as if the space were alive and aware of what was being revealed. Jonathan and Clara realized they weren't just exploring an old building, but interacting with a legacy that transcended generations, laden with mysteries and dangers. Furthermore, an indirect antagonist emerged. A hooded figure who, until then, had remained invisible, began to appear in the corners of the mansion, observing the protagonist's every move. This silent presence intensified the suspense, making it clear that the Hohenberg family's secrets could not be revealed without facing direct consequences. The impact of the turning point was complete. The conflict shifted from historical investigation and academic curiosity to a dilemma of survival and morality. Jonathan and Clara not only needed to understand their family history, but also decide how to handle information that could damage reputations, put lives at risk, and defy the very laws of history and time. At the turning point, Jonathan holds one of the most disturbing letters from the safe, containing veiled instructions and threats, while Clara observes symbols etched into the hallway floor, realizing that the Count had foreseen every step of the investigation. The tension reached its peak. Nothing would ever be the same again. The mansion, the secrets, and the protagonists themselves had irrevocably changed. Jonathan looks at Clara, his eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. The silent mansion seems to breathe in unison with them, as if aware that the deepest secret has finally been touched. Every action from now on will have unpredictable consequences, and the game between curiosity and danger has reached a new level. The silence following the discovery seemed too heavy to bear. Jonathan and Clara remained motionless for a few moments, absorbing the magnitude of what they had found. Each document, each symbol, each letter revealed a web of secrets spanning generations, and the responsibility of handling this information fell entirely on them. The mansion, which had previously seemed merely a place of investigation, now became almost a living trap, reacting to every movement with creaking doors, drafts of cold air, and shadows that lengthened on the walls. The first consequence was psychological. Jonathan felt the weight of his obsession with the truth transform into palpable anxiety. Each corridor he walked seemed longer, each shadow more menacing. He began to realize that his drive for answers could put him in real danger, not only from the Count's indirect presence, but also from the effects of the very secrets he had uncovered. Clara, on the other hand, struggled with the emotional tension of the situation, torn between fear and the responsibility of protecting the mansion's historical integrity. This emotional tension was directly reflected in their interactions. Small disagreements arose, fueled by stress and the fear of making fatal mistakes. Another immediate effect of the discoveries was Count Victor's own reaction. He began to manifest himself more directly, but still with strategic subtlety, Objects disappeared or were moved, doors locked themselves, and signs of surveillance became clear in every corridor. Each of the Count's actions was a reminder that the mansion not only kept secrets, but actively protected them. Jonathan and Clara realized they couldn't proceed without considering that they were dealing with someone who anticipated their every move and had decades of experience manipulating the perceptions of others. The pressure mounted when Samuel, the caretaker, made his presence more evident. He didn't speak, but his silent actions, like closing a door behind them or discreetly moving an object, indicated that there were limits to what they could discover without consequences. The narrative tension increased as Jonathan and Clara had to balance courage, caution, and discernment, realizing that each wrong step could not only hinder the investigation, but also trigger dangerous consequences. The impact of the discoveries also manifested itself in the subplots. Clues about illicit transactions, disappearances, and ancient rituals began to influence the protagonists' decisions. Jonathan found himself facing a moral dilemma. Revealing the information could expose old crimes, but it could also put living people at risk, including himself and Clara. This ethical tension added layers to the narrative, showing that the conflict was not merely physical or historical, but profoundly human, involving choices of responsibility, loyalty, and courage. The direct physical consequences of the investigation became clear when one of the walls of the underground corridor began to crumble under the pressure of years of neglect and abandonment. The secret passage they had discovered seemed poised to become impassable, reinforcing the urgency of their actions. Each physical obstacle reflected the complexity of the secrets they had uncovered. The further they advanced, the more difficult and dangerous the decisions they had to make became. Jonathan and Clara's emotional and behavioral reactions began to manifest more intensely. Jonathan, usually meticulous and rational, began making quick decisions, driven by adrenaline and the fear that the Count would lose or manipulate the secrets. Clara, with her critical eye, tried to balance haste with careful planning, anticipating consequences and protecting the essential elements of the investigation. This dynamic not only deepened the characters, but also intensified the narrative, showing that the external conflict reflected the internal conflict of each one. Finally, the atmosphere of constant threat became almost palpable. The mansion seemed to react to the emotional state of the protagonists, amplifying the suspense. Shadows that were once mere details began to suggest movement, distant sounds became more audible, and the perception of being watched increased the feeling of vulnerability. Each reaction of the characters, fear, courage, doubt, directly impacted the development of the story, preparing the ground for the phase of overcoming and growth. Jonathan clutches the old diary with trembling hands, while Clara observes the inscriptions in the underground corridor. The weight of the discoveries and Victor's silent presence make each step a challenge. The mansion not only holds secrets, but reacts to them, shaping Jonathan and Clara's journey and making it clear that every choice from now on will have profound and unpredictable consequences. The devastating revelation and the initial consequences of their discoveries placed Jonathan and Clara at a critical juncture. The weight of the Hohenberg family secrets not only tested their abilities, but also demanded an inner evolution. It wasn't just about surviving the mansion, but about learning to decipher the complexity of the world they were facing. Every action taken now required practical reflection, courage, and adaptation, avoiding repeating past mistakes. Jonathan, who had always trusted his logic and investigative methods, realized that curiosity alone was not enough. He needed to interpret subtle signs, understand hidden intentions, and realize that the mansion, the objects, and even the Count were part of a living system that reacted to his choices. His transformation became visible when, For the first time, he stopped moving forward alone, began to carefully evaluate each corridor and each clue, and started to listen to Clara's suggestions strategically, recognizing that impulsiveness could be costly. Clara, on the other hand, showed growth in another dimension. Beyond caution, she began to trust her intuition. She noticed patterns in the documents, symbols, and objects that escaped purely rational analysis. This ability to perceive what was not explicit became essential to uncovering deeper layers of the mansion's secret. The interaction between Jonathan's logic and Clara's intuition created a stronger team, allowing both to face the increasingly complex challenges. The mansion's environment continued to be a catalyst for this growth. Corridors that changed appearance, doors that mysteriously locked themselves, and shadows that seemed to come alive demanded not only attention, but constant adaptation. Jonathan and Clara learned to interpret environmental cues, the clinking of an object, the smell of displaced mold, the pattern of moonlight reflecting on stained glass windows, and used these clues to navigate areas that previously seemed impossible. Each challenge overcome strengthened their mutual trust and understanding of the world they were immersed in. Subplots of loyalty and past traumas also fueled the growth. Samuel, the caretaker, discreetly revealed parts of his knowledge about the mansion, testing the protagonist's ability to discern truth from deception. The relationship between Jonathan and Clara matured. Past disagreements gave way to joint strategic decisions, balancing courage and prudence. They learned to trust not only their own abilities, but also their collaboration, recognizing that facing the mansion's complexity was impossible alone. Furthermore, the protagonists began to deal with moral dilemmas in a more mature way. Jonathan recognized that the truth didn't need to be exposed at any cost. Some secrets, although historical, carried direct risks for living people or for the balance of delicate situations. Clara helped define boundaries, creating an ethical approach that would guide their future actions. This emotional and moral growth was as crucial as the physical progress within the mansion. It wasn't just about surviving, but about understanding the responsibility of each discovery. New challenges constantly arose, demanding quick and effective decisions. Doors that were previously locked opened only after a combination of meticulous observation and interpretation of symbolic clues. Secret compartments revealed documents that tested the protagonist's analytical and discerning abilities. Each victory, however small, consolidated the character's learning and evolution, bringing them closer to their final goal without repeating obstacles already faced. Jonathan's skill became evident when, for the first time, he anticipated one of the Count's traps. A corridor that seemed to lead to a secret library was, in fact, designed to confuse visitors. Jonathan, using previously observed patterns, perceived the deception before proceeding, showing that he had evolved from a mere investigator into someone capable of deciphering the antagonist's complex logic. Clara, complementing his strategy, interpreted subtle signs indicating hidden passages, solidifying the duo's growth as a team. The peak of their emotional growth was reflected in their confidence and resilience. The initial fear, anxiety, and constant tension transformed into a clearer and more strategic determination. Each decision, each step, and each interaction with the mansion and its secrets reflected learning and maturity. Jonathan and Clara were no longer just curious intruders. They were protagonists capable of facing a complex system, reacting intelligently, and growing in the face of obstacles that would have paralyzed someone less prepared. Jonathan surveys the mansion from the top of a staircase, Clara beside him, as they analyze symbols etched into the floor that indicate the next crucial clue. They both take a deep breath, aware that they have evolved, not only in investigative skills, but in courage, perception, and ethics. The challenge of the mansion has shaped them, preparing them for the final confrontation with the secret that Victor Hohenberg has so carefully guarded. The mansion seemed to breathe around Jonathan and Clara. Every corridor, every secret door, and every shadow cast by the stained glass windows seemed to carry its own intention, as if the building were aware that they had overcome the initial challenges and were approaching the final truth. The historical setting and the ancient secrets they had uncovered now served as the final testing ground. Subtle signs and obstacles awaited to prepare the stage for the inevitable confrontation. While examining the north wing of the mansion, Jonathan noticed patterns in the symbols engraved on the walls that indicated strategic locations, as if someone had planned for only sharp minds to reach them. Clara, meanwhile, analyzed the newly discovered documents, trying to decipher codes that could reveal the most protected room on the property. The tension was mounting. They knew that Count Hohenberg had foreseen much of the investigation, and any mistake could be fatal. Secondary subplots also reached their conclusions. Samuel, the caretaker, finally revealed his true position. He was allied with protecting the family secret, but also respected Jonathan and Clara's courage. His intervention was subtle, helping them without directly alerting the Count, reinforcing the feeling that the mansion had layers of loyalty and surveillance that needed to be carefully deciphered. The pace of the narrative accelerated. Doors that had previously seemed impossible to open only yielded when Jonathan and Clara combined symbolic interpretation, careful observation, and coordinated action. Each small success generated anticipation and urgency. The imminence of the climax became clear, and the emotional and physical tension increased with each corridor traversed. The mansion, with its subtle traps, began to reveal signs that the final moment was approaching. Jonathan and Clara also faced internal challenges at this stage. The mutual trust, built over overcoming previous obstacles, was tested once again. Each decision needed to balance speed, prudence, and intuition, reflecting not only their acquired maturity, but also the need to maintain clarity amidst the chaos. Small disagreements arose, but were resolved through efficient communication and an understanding of each other's individual capabilities, strengthening the team before the decisive confrontation. Time pressure remained a significant factor. Certain clues could only be accessed at specific times when the moonlight or morning light fell strategically. Jonathan and Clara needed to calculate their movements with precision, as if every second had a direct impact on the unfolding of the story. This urgency created a more intense rhythm, preparing the reader for the climax and showing that the mansion was not just a setting, but an active character that reacted to and shaped the protagonist's actions. Tension also increased because of Victor Hohenberg's indirect presence. The Count remained invisible, but signs of his surveillance were clear. Displaced objects, doors closed in the distance, sounds of footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Jonathan and Clara realized that the antagonist was anticipating their actions, and preparing for the climax consisted both of deciphering his secrets and protecting themselves from his psychological and physical traps. Finally, the narrative reinforced the connection between subplots and the main conflict. Historical documents, secret pacts, and hidden symbols, which previously seemed independent, began to converge, clearly indicating the path to the final room and the mansion's deepest secret. Each element of the setting, each secondary character, and each obstacle overcome served as preparation for the climax, ensuring that the final confrontation was intense, unpredictable, and meaningful. Jonathan and Clara finally reach an ancient hall, lit only by candles and the reflection of moonlight in the stained glass windows. The air is thick, and the feeling of being watched is almost tangible. Every clue deciphered, every obstacle overcome, has prepared them for this moment, the discovery of the Hohenberg family's most guarded secret. The tension is at its peak, and the mansion seems to hold its breath along with them, anticipating what is about to happen. The mansion's central hall was silent, but the feeling that every stone and every shadow was watching Jonathan and Clara was palpable. The candles flickered, casting distorted shadows on the high walls, and the wind howled through unseen cracks, carrying a biting chill. They knew they had reached the crucial point. The Hohenberg family's most closely guarded secret was about to be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Jonathan approached the pedestal in the center of the hall. On it, an ancient dark wood chest, reinforced with metal and covered in symbols he still couldn't fully decipher, seemed to pulse with its own energy. Clara held his hand for a moment, as if they shared the awareness that any wrong action could unleash irreversible consequences. The tension reached its peak. Each step, each breath, carried the weight of decades of mysteries, pacts, and manipulations carefully planned by Count Victor. Upon opening the chest, they found not only documents and antique objects, but a diary that revealed the whole truth. Victor Hohenberg had built the American mansion not only to protect his fortune, but to conceal evidence of secret rituals and pacts that had marked generations of the family in Europe. Furthermore, the diary indicated that some of these practices resulted in the mysterious disappearances of people close to the family, and that the Count had maintained absolute control over the knowledge and movements within the mansion, including the lives of the visitors themselves. The climax reached its peak when Victor's figure silently appeared behind them. Unlike anything they had felt before, his presence was not merely a shadow. It was imposing, laden with authority and a coldness that froze the air. He didn't need to raise his voice. His mere gaze conveyed years of manipulation, observation, and control. Jonathan and Clara, however, did not back down. The growth, courage, and perception they had developed throughout their journey allowed them to confront the Count without hesitation. The psychological tension intensified. Victor began to subtly manipulate the environment. Doors locked themselves, drafts extinguished some candles, and symbols on the wall seemed to come alive. Every action of the protagonist needed to be calculated and precise as they combined logic, intuition, and experience gained throughout the investigation. This was not just a physical confrontation, but a duel of intelligence, perception, and courage. Clara deciphered one last set of symbols in the diary, revealing a secret mechanism protecting the deepest room in the mansion. She and Jonathan realized that the only way to fully expose Victor's secrets would be to activate this mechanism, risking encountering carefully planned traps. The decision was made almost simultaneously. They needed to move forward, aware that both their lives were at stake, but confident in their ability to overcome the challenge. Upon activating the mechanism, the hall transformed. The floor trembled slightly and a false wall opened, revealing an underground compartment hidden for decades. Inside, irrefutable evidence of the family's dark history was preserved. Documents, objects, symbols, and accounts that combined mystery, history, and crime in a way Jonathan and Clara could never have imagined. The magnitude of the discovery not only confirmed everything they had suspected, but also surpassed all expectations. The mansion's secret was bigger, deeper, and darker than any previous record. Victor tried to intervene, but Jonathan and Clara, using the strategy and attentiveness they had acquired throughout the investigation, managed to circumvent his movements, protecting themselves from physical and psychological manipulation. Each action was carefully calculated. They balanced speed and precision, observation and intuition. Finally, upon emerging from the underground compartment with the contents revealed, they realized they had overcome not only the physical obstacles, but also the Count's control over space and their perception. The climax wasn't just about discovering the secret, but about the protagonist's transformation. Jonathan, once impulsive and obsessive, had become meticulous, strategic, and morally conscious. Clara, always cautious, had learned to trust her intuition and act with courage. Together, they faced the mansion, the Count, and the mysteries of the past, emerging stronger, aware of the responsibility of dealing with secrets that could shake not only their lives, but the history they had uncovered. Jonathan and Clara emerge from the underground compartment, their hearts racing, clutching documents that reveal decades of mystery, manipulation, and secrecy. Count Victor, now revealed in all his imposing presence, observes in silence, powerless, before the protagonist's determination and growth. The mansion, which once seemed alive and menacing, now appears almost resigned, as if acknowledging that its deepest secret had finally been exposed. The climax had been reached, and the story irrevocably changed from that moment on. The mansion finally seemed to breathe more easily. Jonathan and Clara, exhausted but determined, sat in the main hall, watching the moonlight reflect on the stained glass windows. Everything was silent, but the weight of what they had discovered still hung in the air. The secrets of the Hohenberg family, kept for decades, had been revealed, and with them, the knowledge of how history, power, and obsession can shape lives and destinies. Count Victor remained in the hall, but his demeanor had changed. The confidence he had exuded for years, sustained by his absolute control over the mansion and family secrets, had now given way to a resigned silence. He knew that Jonathan and Clara had overcome every obstacle, deciphered every enigma, and managed to access what he had so carefully guarded. The final confrontation did not destroy the Count, but it revealed his vulnerability and, in a way, the limitations of his control. Jonathan, who had once been driven by pure curiosity and an obsession with the truth, reflected on the lessons the journey had provided. He had understood that knowledge and power carry responsibilities, and that not every secret should be revealed without considering its consequences. Clara, in turn, felt strengthened by the confidence she had gained, realizing that courage is not only about facing the unknown, but also about balancing action and prudence in the face of complex situations. The documents, letters, and symbols discovered were carefully analyzed and catalogued. Jonathan and Clara decided that history should be recorded responsibly, not to sensationalize the mistakes of the past, but to preserve historical truth and understand the hidden legacies that shaped lives and decisions. The mansion, with all its grandeur and mystery, would continue to retain its dark aura, but now with a balance, for the protagonists had deciphered and understood its deepest secret. The subplots that permeated the narrative also found resolution. Samuel, the caretaker, remained in the mansion, now at peace with the fact that the intruders had demonstrated courage and discernment. The relationship between Jonathan and Clara, strengthened by the experience, transformed into a solid partnership, marked by mutual respect, trust, and shared learning. Small conflicts and doubts that arose during the investigation served to deepen their connection, showing that growth and overcoming challenges go hand in hand with discovery and action. Looking at the corridors and halls that had once seemed insurmountable, Jonathan and Clara realized that every step had been necessary, every door opened, every symbol deciphered, and every obstacle overcome had paved the way for this conclusion. The mansion, which had previously seemed alive and menacing, now seemed to recognize the protagonist's efforts. There were no dramatic endings or explosions. There was understanding, respect for the secrets of the past, and a sense of duty fulfilled. The lessons of history became clear. The power of knowledge is inseparable from responsibility, and courage is measured not only by bravery, but by the wisdom to know when to act, how to act, and even when to retreat. Jonathan and Clara left the mansion transformed, carrying with them not only historical records, but also the experience of having faced mysteries, challenges, and dilemmas that shaped them forever. Jonathan and Clara gaze at the mansion one last time before leaving the grounds. The moonlight bathes the empty corridors, reflecting the revealed history and the personal transformation of the protagonists. The Hohenberg family's darkest secret remains guarded within the mansion's documents and memories, but now past and present coexist with clarity, closing the cycle of mystery, discovery, and learning. Months had passed since Jonathan and Clara left the Hohenberg mansion. The property remained silent, imposing and full of shadows, but its deepest secrets had been deciphered and carefully recorded. Jonathan continued studying the family history, now with a more mature understanding of the power and responsibility of knowledge, while Clara dedicated herself to analyzing each symbol and document, transforming the experience into lasting learning. Even with everything revealed, the mansion continued to hold smaller mysteries, as if remembering that some secrets never fully belong to the world. If you were fascinated by the secrets of the Hohenberg mansion and Jonathan and Clara's journey, share this story with friends and family. Comment below which discovery surprised you the most and how you would deal with such deep and ancient mysteries. Subscribe to follow new stories of suspense, mystery, and unexpected revelations. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters of adventures as dark as this one. Your opinion is important. We want to know how you would react to secrets that challenge courage, ethics, and intelligence.